Coming up today on SEC Country Live, Mike's back from New Orleans. We'll get some tales from the Sugar Bowl and the latest on the injuries out of Tuscaloosa. That's all coming up next on SEC Country Live. Hello and Happy New Year again. Welcome into our program, SEC Country Live. I'm your host, Hans Heiser, in for the sleeping Brandon Adams. He is back. He's not 100%. He came in, he Dig Dog Nation today, but Mike Johnson is back from New Orleans. It's good to see you, brother. How's
good to be back. Man, the trip was, New Orleans is one of those towns, it's kind of like Vegas. You're always excited to get there, but when you leave, you're pretty excited to leave as well. That's definitely the experience I had this past weekend, but got caught up in my sleep, trying to get caught up on the news, and a big roll tide. That's all I have to say, I think, right now. Big roll tide.
So my question to you is, obviously with the first game going into overtime, you said you were at an alumni event prior to the Sugar Bowl. If let's just say I'm an Alabama fan or I'm a Clemson fan, and I'm going into the Sugar Bowl, and I know that my team, if we win the game, is going to get the winner of the first game, and the first game's in double overtime, and I'm trying to get into the other venue, I'm finding a way to get to a television and watch. How did you know what was going on with the other game?
It was first of all, it was a very hectic day down there with the Alabama alumni chapter down in New Orleans. They did a great event over at Walk-Ons near the Superdome, and so I'm seeing some of my former teammates, some old players, Roman Harper, John Parker Wilson, all these guys, getting to chat it up with them, and then we leave and we're walking over to the Dome, and first of all, I got some news on my phone that maybe Tua was going to play, so I'm already losing my mind on that front. And security line is really long, and so I'm kind of stepping up in the security line, and I'm not kidding you. If there was 500 people standing there, 100 of them had their phones out, and they were holding them up so that the rest of the people that were in line could see what was going on in the game, and we're just rising and falling with everything that's happening in the Georgia game, and an incredibly exciting afternoon of football for sure. I mean, I got to see a lot of the Georgia game at the alumni event. I got to see some of it in the line, and then I got to see, obviously, Alabama and Clemson up close. It was a heck of a day for sure.
Saban came out after the game. Of course, they win, talking about the challenges that laid ahead for the week ahead. The short preparation. They stayed the night in New Orleans. They got up the next morning. They went back to Tuscaloosa, and you're talking about, 3 days of practice before they head to Atlanta to resume their practices, getting ready for that game on Monday. I was a little surprised to hear him say that, just in the sense that Georgia probably had a little bit more difficult preparation coming from the West Coast, the time change and all that. But if you wouldn't mind, Mike, just explaining, obviously, the complete difference of preparing for a national championship game now as opposed to when you had to do it.
Well, first of all, I was kind of shocked to learn that Georgia actually did fly back after the game, directly after the game, which was kind of shocking to me in a lot of different ways. Number one, sleep is very important after a game like that. Hydration, which you do not have when you're in the air in an airplane, is very important after like that. But I think that Kirby Smart, one of those guys to get back and get in their own bed. I think Alabama waited till actually the next day to come home, and we're able to do some things, obviously, with a little bit closer proximity. And so it was interesting to hear Nick Saban come out and talk about the fact that maybe these teams are on a little bit of a short break. I mean, Monday to Monday, but you talk about the emotion that went into, specifically in that Rose Bowl. I think that Alabama actually has a little bit of a head up in terms of the preparation they're going to get for the next week. So it was in a roundabout way, kind of an intriguing storyline to hear Nick Saban talk about the timing and the preparation going into these games.
Charles Stuffin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct, Charles, Stuphin, says, let the excuses begin. I guess he's taking shots at Alabama already. Look, both teams have got it up against them shorthand. A little bit of injury news coming out of Tuscaloosa. We'll give you the latest on that in just a second. But we'll go ahead and start breaking down the game, the showdown, the biggest storylines of this game. Number one today, when you look at it on paper, to me it's the SEC Championship, which to me has always been the greatest sporting event that I've ever been to. Because of the fan, you have everybody in there's got a rooting interest. Now, this is going to be the SEC Championship on steroids times 5 in this Mercedes Stadium. What are the matchups you're looking at at the most right now?
I think the biggest deal for me is going to be Alabama's offensive line against Georgia's defensive line. And Georgia, listen, I gave Georgia all the credit defensively going to that game last week. I thought that Oklahoma would have a very tough time moving the ball, especially in the ground game against Georgia's defensive front. Wasn't exactly the case. I mean, you see Anderson roll off about 200 yards of rushing. Baker Mayfield does a lot of the things he wanted to, and Georgia's offense ended up being what happened to bring him back in that game in a lot of the instances. Alabama's offense was good in the Sugar Bowl. They were not great. And I think a lot of people look at that defense for Alabama and you look at the way they match up with Georgia offensively. To me, that's not going to be the story of the game. I want to know if Alabama offensively can move the ball against Georgia's defensive front. Can they do some of the same things that Oklahoma did? And I think once you see these two teams start to square up, a pretty old group when you talk about Alabama's offensive front possibly missing a guy against the likes of Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy is going to make for a heck of a matchup.
The only thing that I look at that I've seen so far out of Georgia is that it just seems like it's that year. You know, things just keep happening for this team in this season. And for that reason alone, I give Georgia a little bit of hope. I mean, on paper, in the field, the eye test to me, Alabama's the better football team. But just the way things are going for Georgia, it's interesting. Let's talk about Jake Fromm real quick. The question all season long is, can Jake Fromm beat you if you allow him to? Well, I think Oklahoma wasn't really a good opportunity. I mean, their defense is not very good. So, yeah, if given the opportunity, he's going to be able to throw the ball 29 times as he did in that game. Now, if Alabama on the other side, with that secondary that they have, if they shut down the run and Fromm's got to throw the ball 20, then I think that's a conversation that you need to have.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's the biggest dynamic in the game. I think when you look at how these units match up, I think I would put Alabama's defense probably as the #1 unit in the game, but I would put Alabama's offense as the #4 unit in the game. I think that Georgia's units both fit somewhere in the middle. Probably Georgia's defense sitting there at #2 of the 4 units that are playing in this game. And so that's definitely the biggest task. You know, what is Alabama's defensive front going to be able to do against a Georgia team that is maybe one of the best rushing attacks they've seen all year? And obviously, Auburn had a ton of success on the ground against them, and other teams did at times. But what do you get against up front? Do you have Deron Payne and Deshaun Hand and Raekwon Davis? Are those guys able to step up to the task of stopping Georgia's front? I think in a lot of ways they will be. You know, obviously the injury that we're going to talk about in a second, Anthony Jennings, is a huge blow to this team once again in that direction. But the way they played Monday and the way they attacked that Clemson offensive front and that offensive game plan, I thought they looked as dialed in as they have in quite a long time.
Yeah, Ben Kelly McCracken says only a freshman. Regardless, it's very impressive what he was able to do in such a short amount of time. I think it's we go back to that Missouri game, you know, where Easton gets hurt and he comes in. They were really struggling offensively early in that game, moving the football, and against Missouri, that's saying something. Yeah. I think you and I go out there, put up some points, at least a couple first downs, but he came in and he immediately commanded attention of everybody in that huddle. He's got those leadership intangibles that you want out of your quarterback, and to have that in a guy so young, it's a testament to his character.
I think, listen, it was a huge talking point last year with Jalen Hurts going into the national title game as a true freshman against Clemson, and I think it's going to be the same way this year for Jake Fromm, and I think he deserves all the credit that he's getting. I think that we can talk about the running game, we can talk about the running backs and the offensive line for Georgia right now, but Jake Fromm, and with all due respect to Georgia's wide receiver core, this is not like a top.
There's no AJ Green out there,
right? You're not having AJ Green or Julio Jones or any of those guys walk through the door. So he has done a lot of good things with not a ton of great talent in that wide receiver core. I think he's hit guys in stride. He's allowed them to run after catch. His back shoulder throws have been downright incredible a lot of times this year to Wims and a lot of those guys. And I think that all the credit that he gets going into this game is well deserved. He's been incredibly efficient. He hasn't put his team in bad situations, and he's made throws that only his guys can get to, which is very tough for a freshman a lot of time.
Well, get ready to hear about Nick Saban versus his disciples, if you will. 11-0 all time. We know it every time he plays one of his assistants, regardless of the situation, regular season, postseason, whatever. He finds a way to get the win. 11-0 all time. How much do you look into that, and how is this a little bit different, if any, from some of those other matchups?
Yeah, well, BA and I actually talked about this on his Dog Nation show earlier today, and I know it's a big deal. It's a big deal to Alabama fans. You're going to talk about Nick Saban assistants. You're going to talk about pro styles offenses beating Alabama in games like this. I think this is the biggest opportunity for a Nick Saban assistant to have beaten. Obviously, you're talking about a national championship game, but we go back to the first game of the year, Jimbo Fisher. A lot of people thought that maybe they'd have the upper hand and beat Nick Saban for the first time. The last couple of years, you got Jim McElwain down at Florida in big games playing against him. So I think it's a little bit of an overloaded statement to say 11-0 against assistants when there haven't been a ton of good football teams, with assistant coaches. Nick Saban's a former assistant coach. So I think that once you start lining these two teams up against each other, let this game have its own life. Let this game live its own life. Let's not try to label this as an assistant game against a head coach. Kirby Smart has proven that he's a great head coach in his own right. So let's let this game play out, and these two teams this year in 2017 tell us, or 2018, I guess now.
Right.
Let's let these two teams tell us. story.
I just wonder what the chess match is going to be when you're preparing for a guy who you spent so much time around.
Yeah.
You have so much respect for. You feel like you know his tendencies in certain situations. You feel like you've seen it all, and that if he has a trick up his sleeve, you might even know what that is, and that's working for both sides.
Yeah.
So the preparation, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in either one of these coaches' office getting ready for this football game.
Yeah, listen, I even mentioned when I was talking to BA today, actually Georgia's, I mean, Nick Saban taught Kirby Smart a lot of things, but when you think about it from the other direction, Kirby Smart knows a lot of the players on Alabama's defense. He knows a lot of the ins and the outs of a lot of guys on Alabama's roster. So maybe Kirby Smart has a little hand up as well, that he knows not only Nick Saban's defense and what the checks are going to be and what Jeremy Pruitt's going to be doing, but he knows a little bit about the personnel offensively for Alabama too. So I think there's a little bit of check in both directions. That's why I say let this game play out. Kirby Smart's his own man. He's in year 2 down there at Georgia. He's done great things. They obviously have a great football team. And Alabama does too, and I think it's going to be a good matchup.
What are your thoughts on the line from Vegas? Opened up at 5.5, it's down to 4. Total's 45.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be interested to know if we could pull that up, that what the total was in the LSU-Alabama 2011 rematch. I would think it would probably be somewhere maybe even lower than that, but for a national championship game, it's pretty low.
Yeah, it was very low, and I actually think the Alabama-LSU game might have been lower than that. I want to say it was like 41 or 40, in the ballpark there somewhere. And obviously, 2 great defenses, and I think you have, not a one-dimensional offense by any means at Georgia, but you do have a pro-style offense that hasn't been that great against Nick Saban in the past. I think that Vegas feels very comfortable with Alabama. What you're getting out of Alabama as a team, and Georgia's the same way right now. Kirby's, constructed them in the same way, but you're getting a team that's not going to beat themselves. You're not going to see 3 or 4 interceptions. You're not going to see a ton of fumbles. You're not going to see a ton of penalties. Both these teams play such a brand of football that is, not only am I going to win, but I'm not going to lose on the way to doing that. And I think that's important to point out. I think that both these coaches have done a great job of hammering that into their players this year.
Both teams played extremely well in their semifinal matchups.
Yep.
I mean, Georgia had a little hiccup there in the first half. They addressed that. It's going to be one heck of a matchup. But Alabama, again, they're going to be playing shorthanded, Mike. And I saw the injury when it happened. I don't want to call it garbage time, but the game was well in hand, and Anthony Jennings, outside linebacker, had an outstanding game. 3 tackles for a loss, a sack, 5 tackles. He's already had surgery. He's obviously not going to play in this game. He took to Twitter here. You got to think it was a very emotional time for him, and what's just been a crazy season for them on the defensive side of the ball and the injuries, Mike.
Yeah, and what makes it so tough about Anthony Jennings being lost, and he says right here, surgery was a success. Still have to wait and see what the next MRI determined Friday. Unfortunately, I played my last game this season. God makes no mistakes. And it's tough, and you mentioned you saw the TV copy. I have not seen the TV copy because I was in attendance for the game, but it's just linebackers, and everybody has injuries. You get it, you miss a safety here and there. One of your offensive tackles goes down. A guy on the defensive line gets dinged up. It's been the same position, and Anthony Jennings is one of those guys that the Tide welcomed back with open arms, and I thought he improved drastically. And you get into this last game, and he was making a huge presence against Clemson.
Right.
He's hitting Kelly Bryant in the backfield. He's making tackles for loss. He's reading the offensive line. He's making tackles on screens. And then he goes down late in the game, and it's just another checkbox in that category. A lot of teams have injuries. You're going to have injuries compile over the course of a season. But for them all to come at specifically that one spot, to me, that's what makes it so mind-blowing. It really does.
Hey, at this point, I don't want to say that you're used to it, that you expect it, because that's
Right.
never the case. But, they're used to the adversity at this point.
Yeah.
Next man up mentality is always where you want to be. The coaching staff's going to have them in that mindset. But it's unbelievable. I used the comparison yesterday. It's like Kenny from South Park. It's like if you're, if you're a linebacker at Alabama, you're just thinking, what in the world's going to happen to me now? But they'll be ready. They got guys.
Well, what's great is Terrell Lewis and Christian Miller are both guys that kind of got welcomed back for the Auburn game. They played, I don't know, they say they were 100%. They weren't. They didn't play that much. They got nursed back to health, and you started to see a guy like Terrell Lewis really start to make an impact against Clemson. Well, now you wonder if one of those guys doesn't flip side, where really one was backing up the other. Maybe all of a sudden those guys both become starters. Another guy, Jamie Mosley, CJ's brother, from linebacker from a couple years ago, he stepped in a ton this year in the garbage time after all the early injuries and played a lot. And he got weeded out of kind of the rotation later on in the year. You're going to see him probably get some reps as well in this team of Anthony Jennings. But the way Anthony Jennings was playing the other night. Now, you look, throughout the year, Anthony Jennings injured earlier, kind of up and down. But the way he played the other night,
right.
That's what makes this such a big
He was healthy.
He was playing a healthy game the other night and really playing at the top level.
Well, they might be without another guy yet. We'll have to wait and see. Another offensive lineman banged up. But you were telling me before, I didn't realize this, that they've pretty much been intact up front all season long, and that the one guy who would possibly fill in for Cotton actually had a great performance in his one start of the season.
When Rosh Piercebaker went down early on in the year, J.C. Hassenauer, who was a senior backup center and kind of a swing guard, ended up playing the next week against Mercer and was the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week. And the only start of his career was the SEC Lineman of the Week. And so Lester Cotton, still to be determined. I would lean towards the fact that I don't think he's going to play just because we haven't heard much news.
Right,
exactly. You would think that he would announce something like, I'm going to be back. I'm definitely not missing this game. Both those guys headed up to Birmingham to Dr. Andrews to get MRIs and to get that all sorted out. So the news is still going to come from Nick Saban later today, and it might even come while we're on the show today. But Lester Cotton will be a missing piece possibly in the national title game. I think you plug J.C. Hassenauer in there. I think he's very serviceable offensive lineman. I don't think you get the push vertically, but he actually might be a little bit better laterally during the pass protection game than Lester Cotton even was. And so you're going to be missing a little bit. I don't think it's quite as big of an injury as Anthony Jennings is.
And then one on each side of the ball. As for Georgia, they look to be just about completely healthy with the exception of Charlie Warner, the tight end. Nobody really knows what happened to him other than the fact that after the game he was on crutches. He really couldn't pinpoint a part of the game where he was hurt, but you do have tremendous depth there with Blazevich, Nada. Big drop, Nada in the Rose Bowl. Sorry, I had to throw that out there. But those guys, Nada's a guy who, 5-star All-World tight end, hasn't done much at Georgia. He's Eason's boy. If he's asked to come in, he's got to step up. Tight end, against Alabama, if you can't run the football, you're going to be expected to make some plays.
Yeah, and we've seen in years past that tight ends play a big role in national title games. I mean, it's like year after year, you see a tight end come up and start to make big plays in some of these games. And for Bama, it was O.J. Howard. Years before that, I mean, we've seen it out of a lot of teams that come to the tight ends because everybody looks at the wide receiver. With Calvin Ridley and Wims, and what are these matchups going to be, and who's going to match up out wide, and what are the running backs doing for both of these teams? The huge stables. The tight end can make a huge impact in both these games, and I think that you're going to see it come to fruition. And I don't know who has the edge. You mentioned it, Blazevich and Charlie Warner being down. That you're going to look to a guy like Isaac Nada. But I'm with you. It's time for Isaac Nada to step up. Right. I mean, we're talking about this, this big time tight end that comes in last year. He's part of the Eason package. Makes a couple of big plays last year. You think this guy's a huge stud in the making, and for some reason or another, just can't seem to get quite involved in the passing game this year.
Yeah, can't get on the field. And when he does get on the field, I mean, granted, the ball was thrown a little bit behind him, but you got to find a way to make that play if you're a big-time player. Do want to tell you, everybody might yesterday, if rightfully so, you'll like this, is trolling Auburn and UCF. The Auburn-UCF thing is all people want to talk about. Here we have an Alabama-Georgia national championship game in Atlanta, and people want to talk about UCF and Auburn. We'll get to that, I promise you. Actually, we'll talk about it a little bit now because we do have some news for Auburn. Looks like a couple of their guys are going to be going to the NFL a little bit earlier, including one of my favorite players to watch, guys tough as nails, Carrion Johnson. No surprise here for me.
Yeah, I don't think there's any surprise here. And we talked last week a little bit, you and I, about Cam Petway and his opportunity that lies in front of him, and now Carrion Johnson piles on that. He's going to be headed to the NFL, and what a special season. And this is one of those things where I look at it, and it's kind of the same thing I thought about Leonard Fournette last year. To me, you want these guys to be successful. So you want them to move on at the peak of what they're worth. And so, they get to head to the NFL. Carrion Johnson, incredible year. You think he deserves the right to go to the NFL, but you almost feel a little bit of sadness that you're not going to get to see the way that things start to pan out in the future had they been there for another year. I think he's right in leaving. I think that his status as one of the top running backs is as high as it's going to be. You look at what the offense looked like in that game against UCF, and you wonder about, with Cam Petway leaving and Cam Martin not getting many carries this year, you wonder how much of the load would have been on Carrion Johnson next year and how many hits he would have taken and how many carries. He might have had to carry that offense at times next year. So I think he makes the right decision. I think he makes the leap to the NFL. I think he'll be an early draft pick, and I think whatever team gets him is getting a stud at a lot of different positions.
And that's it, man. This is a tremendously deep running back class coming out in the NFL. You got Saquon Barkley, you got the two guys, you got Darius Geis. We'll talk about him in a little bit. The two guys from Georgia. He's actually on Mel Kiper's big board, whatever that means, is number 7. He's the 7th best running back. I mean, now the combine, all that stuff could possibly change. But as far as the decision, I agree with you, Mike. I mean, this guy's getting the ball 25, 28, 29 times a game. I don't care who they bring in next year. I mean, Cam Martin's obviously going to be the bell cow for them next year. That's a lot of carries. Running backs don't have a long shelf life anyway. He's got to go. He's not the only guy. They're losing other people as well. Underclassmen also will take to Twitter here. It's been a tough day for the Auburn Tigers. Carlton Davis Davis announces he's also going to the National Football League.
Yeah, and this is another guy I think is in the right direction. Now, he's not obviously not as big of a profile as a guy like Carrion Johnson, but he has a chance to go relatively high too. And you see here, obviously, gives a heartfelt shout out to the Auburn family about his experience there and everything he's been able to get, and he gets that pursues that valuable Auburn degree. And he's another guy. They had a ton of success at different times this year, and I think the reason you're seeing this is because I think that Auburn had that opportunity to play Georgia at number 1, had that opportunity to play Alabama at number 1, play Georgia again in the SEC title game. These guys got looked at a lot, and they played well on big stages. Carrion Johnson and Carlton Davis the same way. So I think if you're an Auburn fan, you look at it and say, hey, what are we getting ourselves into next year? What kind of talent will we have coming back? It's going to be a loaded Auburn defense coming back next year. Dontavius Russell, we announced last week, actually is returning to school. So you're going to be missing some pieces. You're getting some back right now. I think that Auburn's still going to have a very good football team next year.
But they didn't end the year on a good note. And when I'm telling you they let everybody down, including their fans and the rest of the Southeastern Conference, they let everybody down, including their fans in the Southeastern Conference. They didn't show up. They slept-walked through the first half. To me, it seemed like a sense of arrogance in the second half, like, oh, we could just score on these guys whenever they want. UCF wanted it way more than Auburn did. Auburn looked like they didn't even want to be there. They just felt like, it looked to me like they felt, at the end of the game, we're better than they are. We're going to find a way to win. Wasn't the case. UCF has declared themselves national champions, by the way. I don't know if you heard that. Are they making rings for them?
Yeah, listen, I've been in this situation before. And in 2008, obviously at Alabama, we lost the SEC title game. We went on to play Utah in the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans. And I got dinged up in that game. Andre Smith, who was our Outland Trophy winning left tackle, gets suspended. We didn't play with much, tenacity, I guess you will, and we got beat by a couple touchdowns by Utah that year. That's exactly the buzzsaw that Auburn walked into. And I think the question still remains, and BA and I have talked about this a bunch. What is Gus Malzahn and this Auburn football team away from Jordan-Hare Stadium? I thought the game plan looked remarkably similar on offense to what they did against Clemson early in the year. And it leaves me scratching my head. You have Jarrett Stidham, and obviously Jarrett Stidham's numbers are out of hand. I think he threw for 300 yards, had a great completion percentage. But I don't know why you're not giving the ball to Carrion Johnson and letting him carry the ball more early. At times, it's 1st and 10, and Jarrett Stidham's running for his life. I think UCF had 6 sacks, maybe 7 sacks on the game. Even when he wasn't sacked, he was being flushed out of the pocket. I think they thought they were going to go in with an air raid style of offense, and it never really kind of shapes up and comes to fruition if you're Gus Malzahn. And they have to make some changes at some point that allow that running game to get going. That's when Auburn's good, when they have the running game going. And for some reason or another, they took to the air way too much in this game. It reminded me, like I said, we've talked about this a bunch on the show, the Clemson game early in the year for Auburn. They just didn't have any answers. There's no intermediate passing game. You weren't, dumping the ball. If you weren't throwing screens, the game plan looked just the same in this one, and it leaves me scratching my head about what Gus Malzahn's doing at times.
And Stidham's pass, the pick 6 late in the game, ultimately ended up being the difference in that one. We'll talk a little bit about their expectations for next year as Athlon Sports has come out with their top 25 way too early. I don't even like the top 25 polls when they come out week 1, much less 8 months early. But nevertheless, Athlon Sports has done it. We'll let you know where the SEC schools are. But what could have been a lot of momentum going in the offseason for the Auburn Tigers, now a few question marks around a couple guys turning pro, obviously tanking in the bowl game. But I do want to remind you, we are brought to you by AT&T, mobilizing your world each and every day, as we do here on SEC Country. And it's time to take a look at the semifinal defense of the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Georgia offense as far as who played the better game. Georgia's still running. Sony Michel is still running out in Pasadena. And meanwhile, Kelly Bryant is still running for his life down in New Orleans. You can make a case for both, but we'll pull up some graphics. But before we do that, we want to hear from Chris Lowe from ESPN, where he talks about his thoughts as far as Alabama and who they might have wanted to play out of the winner of the Rose Bowl.
I think this is what Alabama wanted. They much prefer, I think, this matchup as they would to Oklahoma. Because if we go back and look, who has Alabama struggled with over the last few years? Teams that go fast and have a quarterback that can move around like a Baker Mayfield. That's not to say they wouldn't have won the game, but they have struggled more against those type of teams than a traditional offense like Georgia.
I got to say, listen, I love Alabama's defense. I think they play well against whoever they play against. But he is completely right when he says that Baker Mayfield is the kind of player that Alabama's defenses have struggled with. And, the Heisman Trophy winner type players, the Cam Newtons, the Johnny Manziels, the Deshaun Watsons, those are the guys that
he's in that conversation. And you just mentioned 3 of the greatest quarterbacks in college football history, and he's in that conversation.
And it's not like Baker Mayfield didn't play well against Georgia. I mean, he played extremely well. When obviously, make some mistakes somewhere in there, but he had had a good game. And so I think that if Oklahoma had won that game and had been able to face off against Alabama, Alabama fans would not be feeling good about that game. So I think that Chris Lowe brings up a great point. And it is interesting to me, and we're going to look at the graphic and the dynamics of the two semifinals. It is interesting to me to kind of compare how both these games went. It was a defensive battle, down the Sugar Bowl. Alabama has to score, a defensive touchdown with Mack Wilson, and there you see the stats right there. The final score is 24-6, but look at the passing yards, look at the rushing yards, look at the penalties. Everything is very, very close to being even. Obviously, Kelly Bryant with a couple interceptions. Deron Payne had one. Mack Wilson had one. A couple of tip balls. But this was a defensive game. This was Alabama coming up and showing up big on the defensive stage, not allowing Kelly Bryant to do things with his legs. They were well prepared. I mean, there was screens, there was misdirections. Alabama had people swarming everywhere. And then we look at the graphic, obviously, from the Rose Bowl out there, and you look at you talk about the tale of two different semifinal games. Look at those passing yards, look at those rushing yards. I thought one of the most shocking statistics from Monday, period, was the amount of rushing yards that Rodney Anderson had against that Georgia front. I think that left you scratching your head for a lot of Georgia fans. Hey, we thought we had a stout front seven. Nobody's going to be able to exploit our front seven. We have speed. We have stout guys. We have Trent Thompson. We have all these guys. And then you have a guy like Rodney Anderson who rushes for 200 yards. And so I think the matchup, and I mentioned this earlier, I think the matchup of the game is this Bama defense against the Georgia offense. I think that at times you're going to see Alabama's offense have success running the ball. At times they won't. I think that Kirby Smart will do a good job of his defense kind of disguising things against Jalen Hurts. But when you flip the other side of the ball and you're looking at what Alabama's defense is against Georgia's offense, to me, the winner of that matchup is going to tell the tale of the game.
No doubt. We're getting, 5 days away already?
Yes, we are.
5 days away already. They're practicing today.
Got my eye black on. I'm telling you right now, I'm ready to roll.
You're going to the game, right?
I'm going to the game, and I got to be honest with you, there is a little inkling in the back of my head that thinks, man, selling those tickets for $2,000 a piece ain't a bad idea, but such a historical matchup. But a place like Mercedes-Benz that you've been, it's just can't beat it in terms of a venue. So
right, it just this season it's been such a whirlwind from the time it started to how we've gotten here and where we are. And to me, the two best teams I saw all year. Yeah. I don't think. I mean, you can make a case. I'm not making a case for UCF. Stop it. You're driving me crazy on this. I mean, it's all people want to talk about is UCF. I don't know if it's trolling Auburn or what their purpose is, but look, these are the two best teams. I think the committee got it right, and they just happen to play in the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I thought it was so poetic. If you don't mind me out there, I thought it was so poetic that both these teams were able to win and make it in the national line, because everybody's wondering, should Bama have got in? Did they deserve to be there? They shut down the #1 team in the country, who I thought was the best team, honestly, playing at the highest level coming into this game in Clemson. The way they dealt with things in the ACC championship, the way they kind of closed out the season. Really, their only loss before this on the year was to Syracuse on a Friday night without their quarterback, with him getting dinged up. I thought they were a great team, and the way Alabama played defensively, to me, was poetic. And then you flip over and you think that Georgia's going to have a defensive battle, and somehow Jake Fromm in this running game, in this offense, come up with 500 yards of offense, and they're able to run the score up. And they're in the 50s. So I thought both ways were very, very poetic for both of these fan bases building towards Monday.
The line is 4. The total is 45. What are you waiting for? Go to mybookie.ag. Place your bets. Put in $100, $200, $1,000, $1,500, whatever it is. They're going to match it. How do you beat that?
Yeah.
How do you beat that? Your first deposit, play with it a little bit. There's going to be all kinds of crazy prop bets. You got to think, how many times is Nick Saban going to smile? How many fumbles? Whatever it is. There's all kinds of great prop bets on mybookie.ag. Be sure to go on right now. We appreciate them being a part of the program. As far as Alabama goes, every year they lose underclassmen to the National Football League. That's what you get when you recruit 5 stars. Well, the other school that does that is LSU. Every year they have to deal with redshirt sophomores and juniors declaring themselves eligible for the National Football League. This year, no exception. They have until January 15th to make their decision, and like all other seasons before, they got a handful of key guys, maybe even more than that have big decisions on their hands.
Yeah, and we're going to show the graphic here in a second, and obviously this is from Nick Suss on SECCountry.com. These are the juniors that he writes about, and there's 6 of them, and he gives possible chances of jumping into the draft. And there you see it. Darius Geis and Arden Key, he's already written off.
Both of those guys are gone.
1% chance of return. I'm not as high on Arden Key as a couple of people. I think that in the NFL, you have to be able to get yourself motivated and get yourself in shape. I don't know that I'm sold on Arden Key being that guy, but you look at it, Dante Jackson, Kevin Tolliver. Look at these position groups, cornerback and offensive line, which are highly coveted in the NFL and are also very tough to find in college football and replace. And so when you look at that, Will Clapp, Toby Weathersby, obviously he thinks Will Clapp has a pretty good chance of returning, and Toby Weathersby becomes a coin flip. But you got to think, man, if 5 of these guys head to the NFL, it makes it extremely tough next year for LSU.
Especially both your starting defensive backs.
That Matt Canada's status is up in the air. There's been a ton of news this week about Texas A&M possibly trying to hire away Dave Aranda, Ed Orgeron. We're going to get into that later. He might be on the hot seat. You see all these decisions that are being made by these guys. They're going to affect all of it. It's kind of a snowball rolling downhill when you talk about how one can affect the other. And then all of a sudden, Geis is gone and Arden Key's gone. And these other guys, well, you know, those guys are jumping ship. I don't know how good we're going to be next year. So let me look at this. Oh, you know, my coordinator's gone. Let me see about getting my way out of here too. And so I think that LSU has to take a long, hard look. And you guys can obviously comment in the comment section. What is their outlook? I think that right now we're going to listen. We're just about to get to the Athlon Sports way too early. LSU's in it. And so I have to think that if 5 of these guys leave, all of a sudden you leave yourself scratching your head about what they'll be in 2018.
And not even counting the guys who've exhausted their eligibility. You're talking about seniors and the young guys. You know, you can replace to a certain extent. They're going to be extremely young no matter what. They were young this year.
Yeah.
You know, they were a young football team this year. New quarterback they'll be breaking in next year. Maybe a new offensive coordinator. I agree with you. It's going to be a tough season.
I think LSU, and I don't know if we ever got confirmation on this, but there was a chance early in the year that they would play every member of their signing class this year. Every member of their 2017 signing class was scheduled to hit the field. I don't know if any of them got redshirted. If it was 2 or 3 because a lot of those guys were playing, not only playing, but playing quality snaps. I mean, you know, half their 2 deep was true freshmen on the offensive line. You have true freshman corners. You have guys at wide receiver position doing things. It just, you have to run out at some point. And I think that's the battle that Ed Orgeron is facing right now in terms of the future of this LSU program. You have to show these guys that you're building towards something they want to stay. Kirby Smart did that last year. Gets a bunch of his guys back in his elder statesman to come back and look where they're at. And I think that if somehow that LSU could hold on to most of these guys, they're going to build towards something too. But you can't tell me right now that if they're losing 5 or 6 of those guys that we just put on the screen that they're not going to have a tough time replacing them next year.
Mike Johnson, Hans Heiser, SEC Country Live. You know, we talked yesterday about all the ticket services crashing. Actually, the big one slips my mind. StubHub. StubHub actually broke yesterday because of the demand by Georgia fans, Alabama fans alike to get tickets to find a way into this stadium for this game. $2,100 is what we're looking at now for the cheapest tickets to get in there. I'd like to be holding a couple of them. I'll be holding for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm holding on to a couple of myself, and I'm not gonna lie. Like I said a minute ago, you know, I got the tickets. I'm an Alabama alum.
I got about $5.
It's a special game. It's in our backyard here in SEC country in Atlanta. So you look at it, and I got those 2 tickets. I got them for face value. I look at that and go, man, that's a hard opportunity to pass up. But I don't know if I could sit out of the game. I don't know if I could sit outside the stadium. We have the graphic here. I can't remember who we're reading this from about the tickets that once the StubHub went down after the Rose Bowl game. I guess that everybody was crowded, and there's Darren Rovell. That's who it was. When the page started working again. Now this is right after the Rose Bowl ends. This is right after the overtime victory. StubHub crashes, and then it says when it started working again, the cheapest seat to the game, which would be played at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, was $24.80. The high sale on StubHub was $104,000. Which someone paid for 10 seats, including all fees on the 50-yard line on the Alabama side. First of all, I don't know who that guy is.
Mike?
I don't know who that guy is.
Man, you got it like that.
Julio Jones. I don't know. You know, let's get somebody on the line that paid $100K to sit on the 50. I'm sure whoever it is going to have a big time. But I'm just telling you. And we can go through it too. I don't know that I've seen a more coveted game. Last year, listen, and I told this story a couple times. I actually sold my tickets to the national title last year down in Tampa on the street. I didn't feel well. It was the end of a long week, and a guy walked up and offered me $1,000 a ticket. And I thought, well, you know what? That'll make this a little bit easier, and I can sit here at the bar with my friends and watch the game. But one of the most coveted tickets I can ever remember. It really is.
It's got to be. And, you look at what a crazy year it's been for ticket prices who've gone through the roof. We have a graphic here of the 4 highest ticket sales this season. And no surprise there that both of these schools playing in the national championship are involved in all 4.
Yeah, and listen, I think these are maybe all regular season games too, so I don't think we've even thrown the semifinals in there. And you look at kind of how this matches up. First of all, the 3 of these are Alabama. Number 1 is Georgia, but the second game right there is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So I mean, it's just crazy the kind of perfect storm that comes from those regular season prices. And we've mentioned it a couple times. And listen, Georgia fans have had to pay for a lot of travel this year. Luckily, this one's in their backyard. They don't have to play. No plane tickets going into this one. But it's going to be an extremely expensive ticket. You paid for that Notre Dame ticket. You paid for that Rose Bowl ticket. Bama fans have been dealing with this. You're playing in Texas or Atlanta to open the year, and then you're circling back around and you're going to Atlanta for the SEC championship game, and then all of a sudden you're going to that semifinal game, and then you got to go down to Phoenix or Tampa to go to these national title games. Week in and week out, and it's crazy to me still to see the fan support after all those years of doing that. And Georgia is digging into that now, where the pockets have to be pretty deep $2,000 is your cheapest ticket on StubHub right now, man. It tells the whole deal.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with Georgia's 37-year process to get here and the suffering and this fan base. And look, there's almost 7 million people in Atlanta. So a lot of people that live in the city went to school, the University of Georgia, have children that went to school, the University of Georgia. There's a sense of pride, and they want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So obviously that's going to feed into the man. I imagine when Alabama went back for the first time, it was probably, you couldn't get a ticket.
No, you couldn't get a ticket. And I'm telling you right now, I got 6 as a player to go out to the Rose Bowl, and I cannot tell you, the tickets were impossible to find. And everybody was making the trip. And Georgia fans just dealt with this, having to fly out to Pasadena and find those plane flights and find those connections. And Brandon Adams obviously is still asleep from his late night connection going out there. And it's a tough ticket, and you're right. You know, I think the fans thirst, and I would not be shocked if there's more Georgia fans in this game just because, you know, it's been built up. You know, Bama's been there a couple times here recently. Georgia fans have pent up frustrations, and they're hoping that they all come out Monday night and they're able to finally celebrate a national title. This is
SEC Country Live, brought to you by AT&T, mobilizing your world. And a couple coaching staffs coming together by some new hires. Without the 2 biggest hires in the Southeastern Conference of this offseason, one in the East, one in the West, Jimbo Fisher and Coach Dan Mullen. They're filling out their staffs, and we'll start in College Station on the offensive side of the ball. No talk on the defense yet. You mentioned Aranda a minute ago. We'll talk a little bit about that. But here you go, some names that some people might be familiar with in SEC country.
Yeah, I think, listen, a lot of people know Damian Craig in and around this, this conference. Obviously, the Auburn guy and him, and then you got Daryl Dickey, who's the new OC and offensive line coach Jim Turner. I think it's a good staff. I think it's, and I say good on purpose. I don't know that it's a great staff. I think that Jimbo Fisher still has some other guys to reach out to. Obviously, they're going to target Dave Aranda on the defensive side of the ball. I think that Daryl Dickey is a good offensive coordinator. I don't know that great is the term that comes to mind just yet, but this is a Jimbo Fisher style of offense, so he's going to be running the show anyways. I think that what you have right now is a hopeful staff. I think you have a lot of guys you think could be great coaches right now. Damian Craig is one of those guys who's kind of been in and out of some programs. You know, he's dealt with some ups and downs in his career, and I think that, you know, he's trying to scratch and claw to get his back. But obviously Jimbo Fisher feels good about what he is and feels good about putting him in that situation. I think he's going to be a great recruiter for them, and I think that's really how Jimbo Fisher has pieced his staff together.
And we're a couple, I would think, just so you look at some of, you know, you look at Kirby, you look at what Saban did at Alabama. Right. It takes a couple years to get these things cooking. And, you know, the biggest part of this thing is putting together your staff. Yeah. I mean, I understand that a lot of Aggie fans right now are wondering what's going to happen with the defense. Chavis is gone. When are we going to address this? Just take your time.
Yeah.
Next thing they don't, you know, start practicing for a while. So make sure you hire the right guy as opposed to making a knee-jerk reaction and getting the wrong guy in there.
A lot of people don't even remember who the first offensive coordinator was for Nick Saban in Alabama because he was only there for 1 year. Do you even remember who it was? Major Applewhite was our offensive coordinator back in 2007. And to be honest with you, obviously Nick Saban doesn't really fire assistants, but he was headed to a different job the next year. And then you bring Jim McElwain in. Then all of a sudden things start clicking. So I think you bring in the guys that can recruit first, and then at some point you flip the switch and say, okay, who could coach these positions up and develop these players? Who are we getting strength and conditioning? You've seen who's a big part of the Florida staff down there. And so I think that you're right. It takes a little bit to get the ball turning in that direction.
Speaking of Florida, they go out and hire a couple guys to address their coaching staff as well.
Yeah, they definitely did. And Sal Sinceri, and we're going to see it right here from Adam Kaplan. Sal
That's your boy.
Who was the Raiders linebacker coach, and obviously a lot of Bama fans know a ton about Sal Sinceri. A lot of Tennessee fans know a ton about Sal Sinceri. Florida State fans out there know a ton about him. His son Vinny was a player at Alabama who was a good player, was drafted by the Saints. Tino, whose son, was the quarterback at Pitt for a few years up there. And Sal is a guy who's well respected. He's very intense. He's kind of got that, I don't know, Brooklyn Italian kind of thing going on where he talks to you like this. And listen, demands respect, demands accountability from his players, and I think that, honestly, I think it's one of the best hires I've seen. I think that he's going to be a great coach for Florida down there.
Not in that tweet. Greg Knox also headed to Gainesville. How's he going to help him out?
I think it's a big hire, too. I think Dan Mullen, like I said, I think he's piecing together a staff of guys who've been around it and know that, you know, how to recruit and know how to bring next-level players in. But I think that, in my opinion, I think that Dan Mullen looked a little bit more at development than Jimbo Fisher did. I think Jimbo Fisher looked at it and said, who can we get in and recruit? I think Dan Mullen looked at it and say, okay, we're going to have guys that can develop players. Sal Sinceri, long history in the NFL. He's with the Carolina Panthers before he came to Alabama. He had guys like Peppers and all these, Charles Johnson, all these guys with Carolina that were great pass rushers. That's what you're getting in a Sal Sinceri that can come in and really make a difference.
Great comment here. It went by too fast. It was Bobby something. He says, why are we even still talking about football? UCF won the national championship. It's over. Like, what are we doing? We're just speculating at this point that there's going to be a game on Monday.
What was the statement earlier on the banner we were reading? It was the transitive property national.
That's right.
I mean, are you absolutely
explain that then what that means?
Transitive property, meaning that UCF beat Auburn and Auburn beat Alabama and Georgia. So obviously UCF must be the better team.
I mean, Mike, if you're players and you're sitting around, you're getting ready to have a team meal or something, you're sitting there looking and say, I don't like the look of this.
No,
I'm happy about our season, but this isn't how I want people. We're a joke right now. We're 13-0 and people are joking at it. I mean, I don't know.
Well, what you get here, it's the upper heads in the administration that want to say, let's keep the recruiting ball rolling. Let's put recruiting things. I'll never forget. We lost to Florida in the SEC title game in 08. Went to the Sugar Bowl and lost to Utah, and we got rings. And I'm not even kidding. I've never put the ring on my finger.
Really?
It's a recruiting thing. Hey, we can walk in and put this ring in for SEC West champions. We're going to put it on coach's coffee table.
That was early in the process.
It was very early in the process, and you're trying to get the ball rolling. So UCF's looking at it going, we got a new head coach. We just went undefeated. Let's have banners. Let's have parades. We can point to recruits and say, this is what we're building down here at UCF. So it's a little bit, as a player, a current player, you look at it and kind of cringe, but I understand exactly what's behind it.
I'm so surprised that they did that. I mean, that is so Atlanta. That's so something we do in Atlanta. Parades for second place. We retired Dikembe Mutombo's jersey. He played here for 5 years. Warren Dunn now is in the Ring of Honor. He played here.
Sanders in the
Ring
of
I mean,
Honor,
it's just what we do.
Yeah.
So, but also, all joking aside, if there is a parade in it for the Georgia Bulldogs, do you think they do two? Do you think they do one in Atlanta, one in Athens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there'd be so many fans that would be so juiced up about it. They might be able to do it all the way from Athens to Atlanta, just lining the interstates. Yeah, just lining the interstates. What is that, 90 miles? You can get 90 miles of Georgia fans. I don't have any doubt about it. So I think it would be interesting. I think they would do it in Athens because I think that Atlanta's going to get their fair shot to celebrate. So
the top 25 Athlon Sports, we said we would take a look at it. The way too early top 25. But the article, I don't want to slight the article. It does kind of give you an overview of who guys are losing, what teams guys are losing, who's coming back, who are some of the diamonds in the rough that you can expect. DeAndre Swift, obviously, if you're talking about Georgia, going to be that guy just because Chubb and Michelle are gone. It's not a doomsday scenario. By the way, you got 2 more 5-star running backs coming in to help them out with most of your offensive line returning. So I suggest you check out the article. It is pretty interesting. But at this point, you're speculating as far as 1 through 25. But the SEC, no surprise here, they have 6 schools in the way too early top 25.
I got to be honest. I felt like the article, and obviously, Bama and Georgia, they're going to deserve to be up there. I think that Georgia will probably head back to the college football playoff next year, if they're able to beat Alabama in a possible SEC title game. I think that all those teams in there deserve their credit. But I felt like it was, did you look at that and think that's a little bit lazy in terms of how this year ended? And all of a sudden you kind of, project that on next year. And we've seen from Georgia, we've seen from Auburn, we've seen some from Mississippi State, that you can't always translate like that. There's
injuries.
What is Nick Fitzgerald going to be coming off the injury? What is he going to be with Joe Moorhead as his head coach? What is Florida getting with Dan Mullen? And what are they going to be able to do defensively next year? LSU, we're reading this list and we're also talking about the possibility they could lose 6 juniors on top of everybody that they're losing that were seniors this year. And so there is a little bit of it. I like the fact that it's a talking point. Obviously, they preface it with a way too early top 25.
Right.
It's a good starting point, but I think that you have to look at it and wait till we get a little bit closer to the season. If we're going to break down really 19 and 25 and 21 for some of these teams, I'm just not sure. We haven't seen it play out on the field yet, and you don't want to pack it on too early. We saw a Florida team that was hyped really early this past year, and going against Michigan, and they get wiped off the mat, and they never really recover.
Another team that was hyped, Michigan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So Michigan, and a lot of people are saying Florida State. Good Lord. Obviously DeAndre Francois.
What about last year? If you would have taken a Florida State fan before the game against you guys and said, look, you're not going to believe what's about to happen to you. This time next year, Jimbo's going to be in College Station. Taggart's going to be your coach. They say, wait a second. We're Florida State, man. This doesn't happen to us. Oh, no. Things can change. My takeaway from that article was, I read the whole thing, is how loaded Clemson and Ohio State are going to be offensively next year. Yeah. They have everybody back. Clemson's entire offense and Ohio State's entire offense are back with the exception of quarterback. But they got some experience there as well to do the Buckeyes.
Well, listen, I think that it's a different style of offense, so it doesn't get quite the production value. And you look at the stats, and that's how you break down what Clemson and Ohio State are getting back. I think that Georgia and Alabama both come back pretty stacked offensively as well, and especially when you look at Georgia. Jake Fromm going into year 2, Justin Fields probably be his backup. You're going to have, obviously, Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel leaving, but it's not like you don't have any quality running backs coming back behind him. The starting offensive line will come back mostly intact, with a couple of guys missing possibly, but You're going to plug in 5 stars right behind them. You've got a lot of talent at wide receiver. So I think that they have the ability to come back with a bang next year as well.
You know, not on that graphic, not seen on there was team number 1A, which was the Central Florida Knights. They were not on there, so we apologize for that. It must have been a typo from Caesar. By the way, have you seen Caesar's jeans today? Our graphics guy?
Caesar is.
That dude is sharp, man. These things are corduroy jeans. I mean, if his legs were too close, I think he'd start a fire.
I'm telling you, the storylines are too busy right now with Alabama and Georgia in the national title game. But in the offseason, I'm telling you, I'll look for it. We will make Caesar. We will make him our champion of life. There is no doubt about it. He will be, one of his Instagrams will be our champion of life, I promise you.
We'll get him in here one day. You and Brandon got to get him in here. What do we got coming up next? We got Hugh Freeze finally speaks, and what a better form to do it than with Outkick the coverage. Clay Travis, who I think, say what you want to say about him, whatever. I think he always conducts a good interview, and he got Hugh Freeze to open up about some great stuff. We got some tweets here just to go into detail from Antonio Morales, who's with the Clarion Ledger in Mississippi, and some highlights from the interview earlier this morning.
Yeah, said he cared too much about what people said at Ole Miss. Social media was hard on him, caused problems in his personal life and making decisions that didn't honor his wife, which, obviously is a huge point of contention. And, we continue on here with some of the other tweets that you see from Antonio Morales, where he really starts talking about the personal stuff was over until it was made public. Said Rosh Bjork confronted him and his heart's sake, and that's before everything kind of exploded, and he thought that maybe he'd be able to move past it and just keep it in his private life. Didn't happen. Expected to be disciplined, hoped Ole Miss could get through it, but once it becomes public, then obviously you get put in a tough spot. We got one more tweet right there where Freeze said he had a conversation with other schools but no official offers. I got to be honest, I listened to the interview today, and I wasn't sure what to think about Hugh Freeze going into listening to it. At times he got choked up. He talked about things that I never even mentally approached about the entire situation. He talked about having to tell his parents what he did, having to admit to his parents and his wife and his kids and his friends about what was going on with him personally and behind the scenes. And I got to be honest, he gets choked up in the interview, but I thought it was honest. I thought that you mentioned it. Clay Travis did a great job with the interview. I thought that Hugh Freeze became likable for me almost again. When you look at him, and everybody looked at him last year before all this fallout, thought he, a humble guy, wears his religion on his sleeve. He's one of those guys that's a family man. And then all this comes out and everything's the opposite again. And so you don't know what to think about him. But I got to be honest with you. I love a comeback story. And after listening to the interview with Clay Travis, I think a lot of people, including myself, are rooting for him to kind of get back on his feet. I don't know what job entails for him or where he'll land, but I find myself wanting to say, you know what, Hugh Freeze, everybody messes up, I guess.
Well, it's not like an Art Briles situation.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Art Briles, you say, look, I don't want that guy near my football program, whether he had, however much he knew. But Hugh Freeze, you think maybe he sits out a year, not by his choice. He says there that nobody's contacted him as of yet. Maybe a year goes by. Maybe Matt Canada gets an offensive job next year. LSU's the name you keep hearing. But at some point, you got to think somebody's going to reach out to him because the guy can coach football.
He can, X's and O's, there might not be any better. I mean, you're talking about a guy who can come in and coach up a situation at Ole Miss. By the way, recruited at a high level. And I won't even get into all the sanctions because I know you guys will dive all over that in the comment section. But nobody can argue X's and O's for Hugh Freeze. He's a guy who, coaches dynamic offenses, who understands how to make plays. And so I think that, listen, you mentioned LSU. There's a couple other jobs that are going to be out there. Looking at Arizona, obviously Rich Rodriguez has kind of fallen that maybe, OC spot out there in a couple of different instances. And I don't know where he lands. I think LSU might be one of the schools that could afford to make a hire like that. I don't know if Ed Orgeron would be willing to do it. But if Matt Canada leaves, Ed Orgeron's got to make a splash hire at the coordinator position because that is a big deal under his stewardship. So I don't know where he lands, but I got to, like I said, I'm kind of rooting for him.
You mentioned Rich Rod, who's out at the University of Arizona's head coach. Speculation, former SEC coaches, Kevin Sumlin, Les Miles, and this is all speculation at this point. I don't know there's been any conversation. Matter of fact, I doubt it. And Butch Jones, which surprised me. You know what surprised me about the article that I read? Butch Jones is 49 years old. I think his tenure in Knoxville aged him 20 years. He doesn't look 49.
No. Yeah, I think you look at some of the other coaches that are older in college football. And what is Nick Saban now, 66? I don't know that he looks 66. Butch Jones looks way older than 49.
Les Miles looks younger.
Yeah, Les Miles.
Yeah, you're right.
He does. He looks younger than Butch Jones. And I think that I don't know that I'd hire Butch Jones at Arizona. That to me is a little bit of a reach. To me, he has to prove himself.
How do you sell that to your fan base?
I don't know how you sell that to your fan base. But I'm telling you right now, Kevin Sumlin, who has not landed a job, perfect landing spot for me for Kevin Sumlin. He's a guy who can coach. This is not a guy who this is not a guy who didn't lead his team to bowl games or didn't have winning records at Texas A&M. He did a lot of good things. Go out in the Pac-12, you go out to Arizona where they can really open up offenses and play Kevin Sumlin style of football. Right. It's not even about does Kevin Sumlin fit Arizona. I think Arizona fits Kevin Sumlin. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a perfect landing spot for him to be able to open it up. Doesn't have to coach these crazy SEC defenses that he was seeing week in and week out. And this late in the process, I think you're hitting a home run if you hire a guy like Kevin Sumlin. You
don't have to worry about any defense if you go to the
Pac-12. You really don't.
You really don't. It would be great. It's just like, having
you
7
guys
on
go ahead
7.
and score 50. We'll score 60 every week. So you guys go ahead.
But, he's out. It'll be interesting to see who they hire a little bit late in the game. But those are some of the bigger names, obviously, out there with SEC ties. Early hot seat for next year. There's an interesting article written by ESPN's Adam Rittenberg as far as the SEC. Obviously, a lot of new coaches, some guys in their second year, some guys having a lot of success. But we always know at the end of the year things change and there is a hot seat. Who starts the year in 2018 on the hot seat? Well, he's got a couple names here for you. He throws out Derek Mason at Vanderbilt and, of course, already the big O down in LSU.
Yeah, go back to the Ed Orgeron comment, as to start off with here. Remember, he wasn't LSU's first choice, and that was Tom Herman, that was Jimbo Fisher. Ed Orgeron kind of falls in this, which shapes how the university and its constituents will view his tenure. Orgeron scored an important win over Auburn, and he finishes SEC play well, but if he doesn't start contending soon for the SEC West, folks will get restless. And I think that's what we're really dealing with when we talk about Ed Orgeron. You're talking about, listen, it was Les Miles that held it to a very high standard. All Ed Orgeron has to come in there, deal with coordinators, keep that same standards in Les Miles, and start knocking off teams and building in that direction. And you mentioned, Orgeron's stats as what he's been paid this year. I think you had that stat.
Yeah, he's $3.5 million. He is the 4th lowest paid coach in the Southeastern Conference. Behind Coach Mason, behind Will Muschamp of all people, who you got to think maybe he gets a little. If I'm his agent, if I'm Will Muschamp, say I'm getting a renegotiation this offseason after my 9 wins, losing my best player on offense, and I forget the other one. But anyway, regardless, he is the 4th lowest paid coach, and that's because they're paying their assistants a ton.
Yeah,
I think Aranda's the biggest, $1.8 or $1.7 million for him. Like that, yeah. But anyway, the thing I never understood about Orgeron, you like him, he's an LSU guy, he's going to be, but look. 5 years? How do you commit to him for 5 years? So if you get rid of him after next year, you're looking at a $10.5 million buyout.
Yeah. I think it's tough. And, obviously we talked a ton on the show about Joe Oliva and everything that's going on with that university down there in the AD position. But Orgeron, to me, it's tough because you look at the struggles you had this year at times, and you look at what Troy did, and obviously knocking off Auburn became a big victory. But when you look at the names we named off earlier about who they might lose, when you look at the fact that Danny Etling is going to be a guy that's gone, you're having to start over a lot of key positions on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and all of a sudden you wonder if Ed Orgeron is recruiting at a high enough level still, and he is. He's recruiting at a high level, but we're not going to see Ed Orgeron with the top 5 class this year. So right. All the talent they have in Louisiana and all the talent they've had into that program, is he keeping it to that level, or is this something that's slowly fading in a downward direction? I think that Ed Orgeron has to do some more work on the recruiting trail. I think he has to land some of these guys like Patrick Surtain Jr. and some of the other guys out there. And he has to keep that standard, or else he will be on the way out next year if he doesn't get to that 8, 9, 10 win season.
I tell you what, he's a heck of a recruiter because he's one of the ugliest people I've ever seen in my life. And his wife is absolutely beautiful. They just showed a picture of him. So he's got to have some kind of sense. He's a likable guy. Listen, I'm rooting for him. I think he's good for football. I think he's good for the SEC. But he's up against it. If he loses a coordinator, we talked earlier in the program about all the underclassmen he could be losing, throw on top of the seniors, addressing the quarterback. I mean, not to mention you play in the SEC West.
Yeah, and it's tough. And that's the thing. I think when you hired, you thought, okay, we got a lot of Les Miles players. We got, we're moving on from that direction. Ed Orgeron's a guy who can communicate with kids in Louisiana. You can start to put that wall back up in terms of Nick Saban and now Jimbo Fisher coming into Louisiana and getting players. Ed Orgeron's a guy who's from there. He can sell Louisiana. He's a part of that kind of fabric of that program. But I just don't know. I think that LSU fans start to get restless where they've expected 10-win seasons and a ton of draft picks, and all of a sudden you have a couple hiccups and you start working your way back and you land in the top 25, but then you have obviously a bowl loss in Notre Dame. Can you keep building in that direction? And obviously we're not sure right now. And Derek Mason was the second one. Let's put his graphic back up too, where he's at a place like Vanderbilt, and he was all the talk last year, and he comes out and beats Kansas State this year in the top 25 matchup with Vanderbilt, and then all of a sudden he has to play Alabama. Then all of a sudden he has to play Georgia. And here it says he only won 6 of 32 SEC games so far. And despite his recent mastery of Tennessee, which who hasn't mastered Tennessee here recently, he must show more progress against beatable East Division foes. Bowl eligibility this season secures Mason for 2019. Anything less than Vanderbilt has a decision to make. And I agree with that because Vanderbilt got so used to the James Franklins of the world. You know, it was like, hey, James Franklin built this program or something. He's able to get it going. Then he's off to Penn State. You hired Derek Mason. He makes a splash. You love what he is in front of the camera. But Vanderbilt, it seems, has regressed. And so at what point do you go on and make a decision to move him out?
I think Mason fits the mold of what's proven to be successful in Nashville. It's got to be a young guy. It's got to be somebody who can recruit and bring in some fringe players that maybe an older coach wouldn't be able to reach.
Right.
I think if you bring
hungry players.
Right. If you bring in an older guy who's more established, who's been around the block a couple times, who's a better coach, I don't know that's going to suit Vanderbilt. I think where they're like, it's a talent issue.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you got to find a way to get some of the better players in there. But, you know, Derek Mason, he's up against the next year. But he did beat Tennessee, which he can join the list of everybody else in the Southeastern Conference and almost on their schedule for that matter. Your boy, Cliff Mason?
Cliff Nelson.
Yeah, Cliff Nelson. Sorry, Cliff Nelson wrote in earlier talking about LSU. He said that they gave Coach O 5 years to stabilize the program and that next year's recruiting class on paper is supposed to be the best in the country.
Yeah, and listen, Cliff says if not for the offensive pass interference, it wasn't called, LSU would have 10 wins this year. And I definitely understand that. Listen, I thought it was...
Well, if you show up against Troy, you win 10 games, too.
That's a good point, too. I think that they almost needed that Troy game to get some things ironed out. Obviously, you get really rolling in the right direction at the end. But I think Cliff would agree with me and a lot of the other LSU fans in the comment section. I'm just not sold on Orgeron yet. And listen, that's no disrespect to LSU. I love LSU as a program. And I know that's crazy coming from a guy that played at Alabama.
It is a little crazy, Mike. I'm a little struck by that.
I'm telling you right now, I love what LSU is. I love what they bring to the table. I love the tenacity. I love the talent. They've always been a great Bama foe. And I don't want to see that slip and start going the direction of Tennessee, who was a great Bama foe for a long time, and a big foe for a lot of teams in these. They've slipped. And I think that LSU has to be very careful with Orgeron at the helm that, listen, at some point you say, you know what, this dynamic just isn't working. Matt Canada might be on his way out. Does David Randall want to stay here? What do we really believe in Ed Orgeron as a coach? Not the coordinators. What do we believe in Ed Orgeron as a coach and recruiter? And so I agree wholeheartedly with the fact that he's going to be on the hot seat next year if he doesn't come out firing guns.
Man, when you're in Death Valley, and I don't have to I imagine when you're in Death Valley and it's at nighttime and you hear that bah, 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 that's got to just be like in your ears all night long.
Yeah, it is.
You know what I mean?
Definitely, listen, the sun has found its home in the western sky, and it's nighttime in Death Valley, and Garth Brooks comes on calling Baton Rouge, and they've got a good thing. I mean, it's an incredible program. And so I speak with respect when I say I'm not sure that Ed Orgeron long-term, I'm not sure if he's the answer. He didn't work at Ole Miss. He did obviously good as an interim job at USC, but to me, I'm going to have to need a little bit more of a sales pitch for sure.
Let's take a look to see what's ahead, and we all know what's ahead. It's the national championship game right down the street. Number 3, number 4, everything on the line. 8 o'clock scheduled kickoff, and what's going to be, I don't know what's going to happen on the field, but the lead up to it is going to be unbelievable. This city's already, people got their Georgia flags, their Alabama flags flying. It's almost like an extended version of the holidays.
Yeah,
it really is.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I went a few years ago, Atlanta hosted the Final Four. I think Louisville was in. I can't remember who all was in, but there's concerts every day. There's events going on at all times. They're already starting. There's concerts that are, everybody's playing. Darius Rucker and then Kendrick Lamar at halftime. It's a complete week-long event, and it's already started to kick off in Atlanta. And obviously, nationally, this isn't like, your headline breaker, as far as Georgia and Alabama, both SEC teams. But in this conference, and we mentioned the ticket prices, this is as big as it gets.
And it's time for our champion of life today, which we tip our cap to Central Florida, who I don't know where this ends. Are they going to have a parade? I mean, every day it's more and more accolades and pats on their own backs. But
I'm telling you right now, and there you see the graphic right there. And this is their their Twitter.
Whose idea was this? It was somebody, the president. And it's just taking it off.
We were talking about it earlier. We're like, is there not like a disclaimer on here anywhere, like a star, we're not actually the national title because. There you see it, the only 2017 undefeated champion. And listen, I get it. It's a recruiting edge. But I'm telling you right now, there's never been a more deserving champion of life than this right here because that's exactly what they're labeling themselves as. We didn't really win the national title this year. We're going to just label ourselves the national champions and give yourself the champion of life title. And listen, good for them. They should be very proud of themselves. I think they're a very good football team. But it kind of blows my mind the blowback you've been hearing from UCF. Oh, it's a great job. It's a great school. Why is Scott Frost leaving? Why? To me, it's a head scratch. For sure.
You imagine Scott Frost. He walks in, he addresses his team. I just want to say we had a great year down in Florida last year. That was not my idea. The campaign that we were national champions. And that's all I have to say about that. Because, the player's like, this guy really didn't. But he has nothing to do with that. Real quick before we get out of here, showing what he's done in that turnaround, it's amazing. But now he's in Nebraska. Big boy. Is Nebraska a place where you can get kids to come play football? Did they even know the history of Nebraska football?
I don't think so.
Right, I don't either.
I don't think, I didn't even know the history of Nebraska football for the longest time. And I think that what Scott Frost is facing right now is the edge of Nebraska never being able to come back. Does that make sense? I think if it's not Scott Frost, I think you call Ken Niumatalolo and say, hey, it's time for us to go to the triple option. Because I think that Nebraska is on that place where you can't really recruit at a high level anymore. And so Scott Frost has got to be able to dig into that background at Nebraska and say, this is a place you want to come play football. I think if he can do that, Nebraska will find its way back, but I think it's a slippery slope.
If they're looking for a triple option, I got some buddies that'll drive Paul Johnson up there for him.
Listen, Kennesaw State, Georgia, they're all over the state of Georgia right now. So I'm sure that they'd be sending a bunch of assistants up there in Nebraska for sure.
Mike, it's good to have you back, man. Thank you guys for bearing with me the last week as Brandon was out on the West Coast. He will be back tomorrow. He's here. He's just sleeping it off. It's been a rough trip. God knows what he's been through. He'll tell you all about it tomorrow from 3 to 4. He and Mike Johnson back in where they belong. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you to our sponsors, MyBookie, AT&T, mobilizing your world. Thanks to everybody behind the glass for making this show possible. And thanks to the viewers. We'll see you guys tomorrow. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.